What is going on? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my friends call me klau. I'm a product manager at Uber Eats based out of Silicon Valley and former Uber APM. At this point in my career, I've done over 100 PM interviews myself and have been an interviewer for over 30 junior PM applicants. And today we're going to go over the top 5 common mistakes that I either see as an interviewer or that I made as an interviewee while doing product design interviews over the past 3 years. So sit down, buckle up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like what you see. Let's go. So the first one is not having a well-articulated, structured approach to solving the problem. One of the main goals of the product design interview to begin with is for the interviewer to understand how you approach problem solving. And as a product manager, they always want to see that you have a structured and methodical approach to tackling ambiguity. That's kind of like the bread and butter of the PM job. What you want to do is lay out your game plan for solving the problem, i.e. whatever framework you're going to use, right at the beginning of the interview. And then after every stage of the framework, you want to summarize your conclusions from that point and then re-reference where you are in the overall framework. So for example, one of the most commonly used PM interview prep books is called Decode and Conquer. And in that book, the author, Lewis Lin, talks about the circles framework, which stands for... If I was doing an interview using the circles framework, I would start by first defining each of the different steps and say, this is how I'm going to approach the problem. First, I'm going to comprehend the situation and ask some clarification questions about the interview prompt. Then I'm going to identify the customer and figure out who my target user segment is going to be. Then I'm going to define the user's needs and requirements. Then figure out which of those are the most important through a prioritization process that we'll talk through. Then I'll brainstorm some solutions. We'll talk about the trade-offs between each of those solutions, and then lastly, we'll pick one solution to recommend. This is how I would start answering the entire question. And then the key thing is summarize your conclusions of that step. For example, say I've just finished the third part of the circles method, so the R. I'll conclude by saying, okay, so now after this discussion, we've concluded that these 3 things are the top user needs. Now I'm going to move into prioritization and figuring out which of those needs is the most important. Clearly summarizing at the end of each stage and then referencing it helps articulate to the interviewer that you have a structured approach. You've defined a game plan for how you're going to approach this problem. And now you're methodically going through every step of the way until you get to a good solution, which is exactly what they want to see. So remember those 2 things: summarize and reference the framework. The next one is not leading the discussion. You as the interviewee are expected to drive the conversation. You should never question when it is fine to move on to the next part. PM interviewers want to make the interview conversational, but don't get it twisted. What they want to see is you being in the front seat. They're saying that they're down to be in the back seat and bounce ideas off of you and give you feedback. The way to make sure you don't fall into this trap is always ask a question after proposing a solution first. That will get you out of the trap of seeming like you don't know how you want to take the conversation or where you want to go. It's actually very fine if you don't know the right answer, right? You and your interviewer will work together to get to a good place, but what they can't have happen is you being unsure of your ability to steer the conversation in the right direction. For example, you're answering a product design question and you just listed some user segments that could potentially be interesting for the product. Sometimes you just don't have a good sense of literally how many do I list. Do you now ask, do you think this is adequate? Can I move on? Or how many should I list? The key is don't just ask that at face value. Say, I'm gonna list 5. What do you think about these 5? Do you think they're good? If so, we can move on to the next step. Framing the problem that way gives the interviewer room to nudge you if they think one in particular is really good, while at the same time you maintain that you have a perspective, and even without their guidance, you would be able to kind of keep pushing forward. What you don't want to do is question what to do next or what conclusions to draw. You're looking for someone to give you opinions on your answer, not for someone to give you an answer. That's the key distinction. The third one is making assumptions without stating them. Oftentimes, product design questions will be very ambiguous on purpose because they're trying to see how you can take a super broad problem and chop it down to something that's actually addressable. And the key here is you're going to work with your interviewer to actually take that broad problem and figure out, which small portion of it we should actually tackle. But the key is to not just make those jumps from super broad to super narrow, without explaining your assumptions, explaining your rationale, and bringing your interviewer along that train of thought. So for example, one interview question that I've been asked by a fan company before was, how would you build a product for improving users' health? I, as a weightlifting enthusiast, subconsciously immediately jumped from solving health problems to fitness problems. And that was pretty evident right from the get-go as I started answering the problem, which was not great. I definitely had one of those moments of the interviewer trying to save me, being like, hey, how do we go from health to fitness? And then I had an aha moment of, oh, whoops, yeah, I guess I made that huge leap, because you can imagine there's more dimensions to health than just physical fitness. So be careful with jumping from point A to point B without even knowing it. And the easiest way to do this is to just think out loud. And I find that writing this all out, either on a whiteboard or a piece of paper during the interview, helps me to process and make sure that I'm not making these logical leaps just kind of subconsciously. Really, it's just like, as you come up with new ideas, articulate like literally what the ideas are, what you're thinking about, and being very meta about it. It helps give the interviewer perspective into how you're thinking, and they can also more easily tell if you're lost or like need some guidance. So the more you're communicating, the better, really. Moving right along. Another thing I commonly see is candidates not considering both the user's perspective and the business's perspective when coming up with a solution. It's somewhat common that you'll see some candidates speak solely about the user or solely about the business. What you really want is both. So when you lay out your answer to the problem, you definitely want to have a section in your framework where you talk about who the user is going to be, what their needs are. You also want to define the needs of the business and why this problem, this solution is a priority for the business and how it ultimately contributes to whatever goal or KPI that the business cares about. Basically, you want to answer the question of why this product will be good for the user, but also why the business would go about building it in the first place. And the last one is something I'll call innovation. A lot of people seem to think that in order to nail a product design question, you have to come up with something mind-blowing. Like if you're not Steve Jobs and you're not able to come up with just like a totally magnificent game-changing solution within a like 40-minute conversation, then you won't get the job. That's kind of absurd. The goal of the interview is to come up with one good idea. You don't need to change the game because it is so ridiculously rare to see a genuinely new idea that it's almost ludicrous if you think about it a little bit. That said, one caveat is don't just jump straight to the obvious solution. What's most important in this interview is the interviewer getting a good sense of how you think and what your process is like. Don't obsess too much over about the idea. It's fine if you come up with something standard and obvious. Like there's a reason why it's standard and obvious. It's probably because it's a good idea. And yeah, those are the top 5 mistakes I see people make in product design interviews. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, please give this video a like, maybe comment down below something you learned, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one coming your way every week. To quickly summarize, make sure you always have a structure in answering product design questions. Always be driving the conversation and lead your questions with a proposed solution. Third is state all your assumptions and think out loud in your interviews. Fourth is to consider both user needs and business needs in formulating your solution. And 5, you don't need a mind-blowing, crazy, out-of-this-world idea. You just need one good idea at the end of the interview. Hope you learned something and that you don't make any of these mistakes in your interviews to come. Best of luck in your prep. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.